right, welcome everyone. I think we can go ahead and get started. I just want to start off by saying thank you guys so much for dropping in today. My name is Dylan Huffpower, and I am one of two admissions counselors at the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. And we're so excited to feature several of our really outstanding faculty members this week during National Public Health Week. And whether you're watching today in celebration of the week, whether you're watching because you're interested in a career or a specific area of research. I really think that you will learn a lot about our speakers, but really about how vast the field of public health really is and how ever changing the field is. So, our first speaker of the week is Mollye Demosthenidy. She is an associate dean for strategic initiatives as well as a faculty member at our school. And today she's going to talk to you a little bit about her journey in public health and some of the research that she has been working on. So if you'd like to take over and introduce yourself.
Sure. And thanks, Dylan. And good job on the name. It's a tough one. No one ever gets it right, but you got it right.
I got it right. Woo, I was nervous.
So, hi, everybody. My name is Mollye Demosthenidy. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Health Policy and Management here at the Tulane School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. And I'm really excited to be here today and talk to you about my favorite topic, which is the Affordable Care Act, the large piece of legislation that never goes away and never goes out of style. So I'm actually a graduate of Tulane. I graduated, I got my law degree and my Master of Health Administration in 2007. I started in New Orleans pre-Katrina and then graduated post-Katrina. And I practiced law at two New Orleans firms doing regulatory and transactional work for providers. And one of my tasks as a young junior associate was to monitor legislation and regulation that might affect our clients, and we represented providers. And so from the very beginning of really my career in '08, I started monitoring health reform. And I remember I had this in my office, I had this big whiteboard where we track kind of what was happening so we could report back to our clients. And it was insane because if anybody remembers this from '08, there was 3 different bills and they were coming from different parts of the legislature and they were ever changing. I would get on these calls and hear updates. And I look back to that time now, 10 years later, and I recognize that I did not realize what a moment that was for public health. What the passage of a bill that got us closer to universal health coverage. It didn't get us all the way there, but it got us closer than we were. How impactful that was, and how important that was, and what a big deal it was. I won't use the language that Joe Biden used when he gave President Obama a hug on the day of the signing, but it really was a very big deal because, if you go back and think about the history of health reform in this country, we've been talking about trying to get to universal health coverage since the days of Teddy Roosevelt, since the early 1900s. And no president has really succeeded in getting this close before Barack Obama. There were some wins along the way with Social Security and what that did for particular populations. There were some wins in the 60s around Medicare and Medicaid. There's the Children's Health Insurance Program. There's expansion of Medicare, all really important for us, but nothing that would get us really close and would get us looking like our peer countries. We're the only developed capitalist nation in the world that doesn't have coverage for all of its citizens and residents. And that is not a badge of honor for us. So, in '08, it was interesting to watch, right? The President Obama took over with a really big Democratic majority in the Senate and a pretty nice majority in the House, and decided that top of the agenda after the recession and economic stimulus would be healthcare. And I think decided that in the face of advisors saying, don't do this. Like, look back, no one has succeeded. Why would you take that on? And the administration did. And I don't know if you remember from '08, it was like a really bruising battle. It was a year and a half of negotiation and trying to work in a bipartisan way without what we can look back now and look at hindsight, without recognizing that it was never going to be bipartisan, and that this country remains, will be, for the future, really politically polarized. And the fact that the administration and Congress was able to do something, in that 10 years later, really 11 years later, now we're looking back and saying that was a really big deal. And it's not perfect, which is, I think, what makes it really interesting to look at right now, because it's not as if we are all in this room standing here and saying, oh, wow, healthcare is great in this country. Like, everyone has access to it. It's pretty inexpensive. It's super high quality and consistent. I suspect all of you, even through your own interactions, can recognize that that's just not the case. This healthcare in the US is really complex. It can be good, it can be bad. And we spend a ton of money on it, whether it's the money that you take out of your pocket, or the money that your employer pays, or the money that the federal government pays, or the money that the state government pays. Everybody's taking out a lot. And we just don't get the outcomes that are commensurate with what we spend. But that doesn't mean that the ACA wasn't a big deal. It certainly, it's a moment, I think, for us to look back, because last year I felt was definitely a moment where we were at a kind of a crossroads. We had a presidential election, right, that would decide kind of what the agenda is going forward. And you've got one candidate, President Biden, who says, look, I want to build on it. The analogy I've seen recently is that the ACA is like a starter home. It wasn't designed to last forever. It was meant to be added onto or traded up. But we've got to build on it. And you have another candidate who's like, we need to get rid of this thing. It's an albatross. And we now have come out on that, recognizing that there's work to be done, and we're starting to see that work. So I don't know if any of you paid attention to what people, I think, are starting to call ARPA, which is kind of a funny name, but the COVID stimulus bill that came out, which had tweaks and really the most substantial changes to the ACA since it was passed in 2010, which go towards addressing some of those problems that we see that remain, at least along the access side. So how do we get to full Medicaid expansion? How do we get more people in the individual market, bigger subsidies? How do we address the folks who say, look, I'm not eligible for Medicaid and I'm not eligible for subsidies, but I still am getting quoted $1,000 a month in the insurance market. How do we solve that problem? And so we saw money being allocated for at least 2 years through the stimulus bill to address that. So I think that we're coming it's coming full circle. We are seeing the ACA as close to operational as it's ever been. 39 states have expanded the Medicaid program, including DC. We've got everyone eligible for subsidies. We've got an open enrollment period. So really, as we look forward, this is the moment where you'll really see whether it can fulfill its promise, and then whether we need to continue to build on it. And I think that brings us to what everybody's watching, which is, will we indeed see a public option in the next couple of years? And that's a stay tuned moment, I think, because of the political polarization, because it'll have to go to the reconciliation bill if it exists, and that'll have to be done next year, and that'll compete with infrastructure. But even if we don't get it, even if we don't get the public option in, This thing is as close to operational as it is intended to be than it's ever been. And so in some ways, we'll see if then that will depart from the experience of the last 2 years. It's a real new decade and like a new rebirth for that. So I see in the chat, there's a question about the public option. So the public option is the option, not the requirement, but the option that anyone, regardless of their income level, regardless of their characteristics, could purchase into Medicare or Medicaid, a government-run insurance plan. Right now, in order to receive Medicare, you have to be statutorily eligible. You have to go meet one of the criteria, and then you get it. Same thing with Medicaid, right? You have to meet certain criteria. I cannot go to the state of Louisiana and say, hello, I would like to purchase Medicaid. I cannot go to the federal government and say, hello, I would like to purchase Medicare. But a public option would open that up, that I could indeed perhaps go to Louisiana and say, I would like to purchase a Medicaid plan, just like I can purchase a Blue Cross plan. And in a public option was talked about in 2008. And for those in Congress who were more progressive, was really considered to be essential to the legislation. 2008 is not actually that different than right now, at least at the politics of it. There are factions within the Democratic Party that want single payer, and that think that that is really the only way forward. There are factions within the Democratic Party who do not want a single payer. Just as the Republicans had trouble coming up with a replacement option that satisfies everyone in the party, as do Democrats, which really explains why the ACA looks the way it did. It was really the most politically viable option moving forward. It was really the only way to get something done. And that means it's in the middle. That means it's incremental change. That means that it's not satisfying everybody. But we're 10 years in, and the conversation has really shifted. At least the politics of it have. And I think you're seeing, if you look at the polling data, a lot of public support for, even with folks who have insurance, who are like, yes, if someone else would like to purchase Medicare, why would I care about that? I'm fine with that. And it's this question of whether we'll now see a public player in the private market, which really does fundamentally change the private market. It goes to some of these more philosophical questions about a market, what kind of market we want to have, whether we want to have a market. I say this in class all the time, this would be really fascinating if we were not living it. They are the really fundamental questions about what we want the system to be, what we want the role of the market to be, what we want the role of the government to be. And we're constantly answering them throughout. So, Dylan.
Yes.
There you are. I know that you all on social media had framed this as a discussion. I'd be happy to answer questions for folks about what's on your mind, what questions you have about the ACA, anything.
Absolutely. Feel free to post everyone viewing in the chat if you have questions. I kind of want to know more about whenever I work with students who are interested in studying public health, particularly at Tulane. A lot of them, I've noticed, have discovered public health in its many areas and facets later in life. So sometimes they aren't sure how to decide what to focus in, or they have many interests. So for you, can you talk about how you got interested and more involved with healthcare and that sort of, how'd you get to where you are?
Sure. A long and windy road, which is maybe the answer of how everyone gets where they are. I don't know. Perhaps it's just me. So, I graduated from college in 2003. And I think that this was maybe a success of public health in the 90s, but I really had never heard of public health. I went to a university that did not have a school of public health. It was just they were not words that I knew or used. And I decided to go to law school, but I knew I wanted to work in healthcare. And when I arrived at Tulane, I learned about the joint program, and I got to learn a lot more about public health. I think that this is not an experience, hopefully, that anybody would have in 2021. It's hard to not turn on the evening news or pull up Twitter and see something about public health because of the pandemic. But I really, got to have that eye-opening in the early 2000s or the mid 2000s, of what public health is and how many different kinds of people are working toward this common goal of health for all. And I think that's what's really exciting about public health. I mean, all of the colleagues that I work with, they're all very different than me. They're working in public health workforce. They're working in health equity. They're working in vaccine policy. They're working in, econometrics. They're working in organizational behavior. We all bring this interdisciplinary skill set to projects and to the table and to the classroom, that helps advance the important questions around what it means. How do we achieve health for all in this country and across the globe? So it's not really answering your question, but I think there's no more exciting time to be in public health than it is right now. And I think that public health is at this moment in need of people with diverse perspectives coming to work on these teams.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And again, anyone watching, feel free to ask any questions that you guys have. Can we talk a little bit more about if someone is interested in public health, was there a turning point in your career that really kind of moved you forward or set you on a path for success? Or maybe if you have a specific strategy or something in mind that students can do to help pursue their own career in public health?
So the best advice I can give is to be open to opportunities that present themselves. I think I personally benefited from just being willing to say yes to things that are in front of me. I mean, if you'd asked me when I was 22 what I was going to be doing in 10 years, I really didn't know. If you ask me now what I'm going to be doing in 10 years, it's the same answer. I don't really know. I mean, I think there's so much out there that opportunities that you just don't know about. And you have to, all you can do is be as prepared as possible at any given moment to be able to say yes to those. And I think that that's really true in public health. I imagine all the folks on this call have sort of a direction that they think that interests them, and have a direction that plays to their own strengths, which is really important in kind of deciding, I think, what your career is going to be. But you just head that way, and then see what doors open and see what doors you see, and then push them open. That has served me well.
I think we're getting some questions in the
yeah.
chat.
So the first one I saw is the ACA sustainable without the mandate? That's a great question. And, I think the answer is yes. The mandate was repealed in 2019. So we've got actually some pretty decent data on this. For those who are not familiar, one of the big pieces of the ACA was that there was a mandate. Everybody had to buy insurance. But on the positive of that was everyone could get insurance, regardless of your health history, personal characteristics, which was something, again, that was really unfair in the US. And the mandate was dropped in 2019 as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And what we're seeing is that the same number of people are still purchasing insurance. And in policy, we think of things in terms of carrots and sticks. A mandate was a stick, right? It was a penalty that said, if you don't do this, we're going to penalize you. The thing that actually makes people purchase insurance is the carrot, is the incentives. It's the subsidies to make coverage more affordable. And that we're seeing that more subsidies are pulling more people in rather than a penalty. So yes, which is really different than what lots of policy folks thought initially. Let's see. Is there something about the ACA that surprised you over the last 10 years? What surprised me is that I really thought that the opposition to the ACA would lessen. I really did, because I remember reading or seeing an interview with Joe Califano, who was a health policy guy, and he was talking about the implementation of Medicare and Medicaid. And he talked about that, there was opposition to Medicare and Medicaid. He said, but the problem was that the issue with the opposition is that the problem was real and generalizable. And that's true in healthcare. The problem is real. People don't have access to affordable insurance. It's generalizable. Everyone on this call knows of a personal scenario of them, their mom, their neighbor, someone, right, who had something happen to them and it was difficult or it was expensive or had these financial consequences. And so I thought that the passage of it and it going into effect, that the opposition would not go away, but I'm not that naive, but would die down a little bit. And it didn't. And I heard President Obama give a talk about the ACA at 10. And he said what they understood but didn't recognize would be so big is that that passing the ACA, passing such a big piece of legislation would open the door for now any problem around healthcare in 2016 or 2018 to be blamed on the ACA, whether it was related to it or not. And because it become so entrenched in like partisan politics, that it was. So that's like the most surprising thing to me, because you don't hear people clamoring to be like, we really want to go back to 2007. Like 2007 healthcare was amazing. We loved it when insurance companies could deny you. We think that's awesome. No one's saying that. But they're also saying like, you've not actually solved the problem here yet either. And that's totally fair. I'm looking down my chat. What skills did I gain with my MHA that I utilize most in my work now? So I actually was thinking about this the other day, like what I remember most about my coursework. And unfortunately, I'm like decently removed from graduation. So I don't have like strong memories of projects or things like that. But I definitely remember both with the MHA and my law degree that the thing that I came out of my degrees with was like the ability to be a really critical thinker, to look at scenarios and say, okay, but the real issue here is X. The real important question, the question that matters, the policy actionable question is Y. And then tackling it that way, sort of being able to look at complex scenarios and distill them pretty quickly and to distill it down. And I felt that a lot of my coursework, and I didn't realize it at the time, but was like training me in that way. And that's something I think I'm still good at. That's like really helped me in every job I've had, whether it be in a law firm or now in academia. I see Carrie's question. If we're interested in healthcare policy, what can I do to get my foot in the door? So I think the best thing to do would be to try to just get some experience, any experience, and I'm using the word experience really broadly. This could be volunteering at a local health department, at a state health department. This could be volunteering at a vaccination site at the moment. This could be an internship with a policy think tank. It could be thinking about, government relations inside of an organization, like just any exposure you can get that helps to inform your own understanding of what what the policy world looks like. I think truly here, no experience is bad. Like there's no experience that would be a bad experience, because all of it will help to contextualize and direct you and to say, oh, this is really interesting. I like this, or, oh, government work is not for me. I really want to work on a nonprofit side. Like all of that helps to inform. So that, and it's the advice I give my students, like read the news, which I suspect most of you do, but like to be just an engaged citizen. For better or worse, healthcare is always in the news. There's always something happening. I'm teaching an undergraduate class this semester, and as we were learning about the ACA, the American Recovery Plan was being passed, right? And so we're like learning about the subsidies in real time. This always happens. I think I'll unfortunately always have a job because I don't think we're gonna like solve this next year and suddenly stop talking about healthcare. So staying abreast of what's happening makes you an informed citizen, but it also makes you ripe for someone who wants to work in policy. Oh, Cam. Hey, Cam. I see your question about COBRA. Yes. So the answer, COBRA, let me back it up. Cam wants to know if COBRA subsidies were included in the COVID stimulus bill. And the answer is yes. But let me back it up a step and just explain COBRA really fast. So COBRA is a creation, I think, of the 1990s, which it's continuation of benefits, something or other. I cannot keep all of these acronyms in my head. What it does is it allows people who have left their employment or who've been laid off to retain their employer-sponsored coverage. So before, when there was no Medicaid expansion, there was no private market, it was really important. Almost, the way people got insurance was through employers. It was really hard to buy it privately. It was just complicated and it wasn't subsidized. And so if you left your employer, when I left my first firm and went to my second firm, they give me some paperwork and they said, here, you can stay on our health insurance plan for a certain amount of time. But the catch is you are responsible for paying 100% of the premium. And in some, but not all work scenarios, employers often kick in some of the premium. So I remember they hand me this bill. I'm like, in my 20s, and they're like, it'll be $625 a month or something, which now people would be like, oh, that's not that bad. But at the moment, right, seemed astronomical. And so I could have kept my insurance through that, but I would have had to pay the subsidies. What happened, or I would have had to pay the premium. What happened with the COVID stimulus bill is it allows for government to subsidize all of COBRA premiums through September. So thinking about folks who've been laid off, particularly as it relates to the pandemic, what we would expect might be back in the workforce, that those jobs would be back open. We would be seeing employers hiring again by fall. So it allows folks to have continuous coverage that they're not on the hook for. Because if you're unemployed because you've been laid off, particularly in the midst of a pandemic, it is highly unlikely that you could afford your premium. So this is the government bringing in a safety net around that. So yes, I too enjoy COBRA as well. I hope that answers your question, Cam. Benton's question, where do you find polling data indications of public opinion favoring one option over another, moving closer to universal coverage? So there's some good polling that comes out of Kaiser on this. Benton is one of my students, and we've actually had conversations about this. This is one, and I'm sure people who work in polls will tell you it always matters how you phrase the question, but like this one really matters how you phrase the question. You can ask people, do they favor Medicare for all? Or you can ask them if they favor single payer, and you'll get different percentages, even though those are really fundamentally the same thing for us in the US. You can ask someone if they favor Medicare for all, and they'll say yes, as long as I can keep my employer plan. And those things are at odds. Medicare for all is a single payer. It's actually well named. It's Medicare for all meaning all y'all, like all, everybody. I think that when we see those polling questions put together, what a person who says, yes, I like Medicare for all, but also like keeping my private plan from my employer, what they're really saying is, yes, I favor a public option. Yes, I favor Medicare for anyone, all who want it. And that's different than Medicare for all. And so in some ways, I think healthcare is already so complicated, and we really are driven by polling data, like to help us think about what should be on the agenda. But it's really kind of too complicated to ask people sometimes, because it's hard to get it down, distill it down into a way that someone can answer the question or knows enough to answer the question. I mean, I think you all probably have had experiences where you could say, signing up for health insurance coverage is complicated. I mean, I do it at Tulane every year, and sometimes I like want to fall asleep as I'm reading the plans. It doesn't get better. It's not fun for anybody. And so the more complicated it gets, the harder it is then to gauge public opinion about it. I see Nurjan has a comment. One of the ways to improve public health is to engage in advocacy and influence decision makings. What are tips for public health researchers and practitioners about how to do successful advocacy work with policymakers? This is a really great point, and I think a really important one, because what's really bad for policy is when you have researchers on one side who are just doing the good work and asking good questions, coming up with some answers. And then you have policy folks on the other whose hair's on fire all the time, and they're just working, right? And they're not, never shall the two meet. What we really need is that research to translate into policy. And I think you have to think beyond like the traditional ways of disseminating research into how can we put out more research on media? How can we get coverage of studies? How can we distill it down to a 5 bullet point? How do we take this and get it to our local health departments? Like, I think it looks different in every scenario, but I think the question you're asking is like the question, because a really amazing paper and a really amazing data analysis that just stays in a paper and doesn't make it to policymakers who might not subscribe to the journal, that's problematic. That's not making it in. Lauren, hi Lauren. Do I think that ARPA will influence the remaining states to expand? That's a really good question too. So one thing I didn't mention about the stimulus bill is it provided a 2-year financial incentive to states that have not yet expanded their Medicaid programs. So there's 19 of them out there. They're mostly in the South, Texas, Florida, Georgia being the 3 largest states that have not expanded their Medicaid program. And what the federal government did was it said, look, if you expand your Medicaid program now, not only will we pay for 90% of the expansion like we do for everybody else, but we'll also give you a 5% increase on funding for your traditional Medicaid program. So they're using incentives here. They're throwing more money at the states to say it's really important to us for you to expand. Here's more money, please do it. Lauren's question is a good one. Will it work? I think it'll work for smaller states. I don't see Texas, Florida, or Georgia really moving at the moment because it's become so political. Because it really doesn't financially make sense to not do it now. It made sense to do it a year ago. It made sense to do it 2 years ago. So the thing standing in the way is the politics of it. And I don't know that the extra money will overcome the politics for those big states, which is just unfortunate. But optimistically, I'll say, when I started out, teaching this in 2014, which was the first year states could expand, it was like 12 states that expanded. And then it was 15, and then it was 19, and then it was 22, and then it was 24. And every semester I teach it, I have to go to Kaiser to be like, did somebody expand and I missed it in the news? And every semester I put a new map up. Like you can, it's really analogous to the creation of the Medicaid program, which is also a voluntary program. And it took about 20-ish years for all states to decide that they were going to have Medicaid. And now we have 55 Medicaid programs, states, DC, territories, all of it. So I think eventually, we'll get closer. I don't know, but I mean, here's hoping, right? Because it really matters to those folks in Texas. It really matters to the folks in Georgia. It really matters to the folks in Mississippi. It matters to the folks in Alabama. I mean, it matters. The next question I see from Bryn, and Dylan, let me know if I missed any. What sort of jobs are there out there for students interested in health policy, and where do you see the field going in the next 5 years? So I've always thought about it conceptually as kind of policy jobs fit in 3 types / settings. And it's much more nuanced than this, but I think this is a good way to think about it. There's government jobs. So there's folks that are working in policy at the city of New Orleans, state of Louisiana, CMS, Health and Human Services, FDA, right? That is replicated all over the country. And there's good work to be done, whether it's at the executive level, so in departments, or the legislative level, city councils, the state legislature, thinking about committees on health, California state legislature, right? There's all of that. Then there's the analysis work that happens in mostly not-for-profit organizations, just doing good policy analysis, more research-oriented, and it's producing the answers to questions that should inform and influence policymakers. And then there are the folks in the middle who try to connect those two. And that can be in lobbying, that can be in government relations, that could be in policy-centric organizations or health-centric organizations. There's others in there, but they kind of pull from one of those 3. So what I've always liked about students who are interested in policy is I think it sounds specific, but it's actually not. I mean, I have never had a graduate really go and do the same thing as another graduate, which tells you, right, there's a lot of the breadth of jobs out there is pretty big, which is good because I think, you know, if you'd asked me in my 20s, am I interested in policy, I would have said yes. And then you said, what do you want to do with that? I'd have been like, I don't know. What do people do with that? And I think being part of a program where you can learn about that and you can connect with and see paths that others have blazed and then kind of be like, yes, on that one, a solid no on this one. It's helpful. Okay, if all 50 states expanded Medicaid, how would that influence the discussion about universal healthcare in the future? I'm assuming it would be indicative of public support and political momentum. So if all 50 states expanded Medicaid, I don't know if I think that that's related to us moving to single payer. In fact, you could read it as states saying, like, we're okay with the system as it is, and we recognize there needs to be a more solid safety net for lower income folks who are, you know, in jobs without benefits, or who work in multiple part-time jobs, or who are caretaking, or who are doing something. I fancy myself as a pragmatist. I think that President Obama and I are similar in this way. Isn't everyone trying to find a way they're like President Obama? I think, you know, if we were getting to design our system from scratch, I think this conversation would be totally different. But this thing is 1/6 of our economy. It's kind of built. 85% of people have insurance, and they're afraid of what a big change would do. So the politics around that are really, really tricky. And so I do think if we're going to get there, it's going to be incremental. Like, I could see us, if there were Medicare for all who want it, so a public option to buy into Medicare, and then that were just so much cheaper than either employer-sponsored coverage or buying in the individual market, then people will start choosing that. And then everyone's choosing the public option, and we're getting close. Medicare is getting bigger and bigger, and we're getting closer to a single payer. Like, I think we do that before we just move to full Medicare for all. That's a real, I mean, that's just a real shock to the system. Well, actually that ties into Jeffrey's question, which is, does moving to Medicare for all, does it solve the problems with insurance, like having to switch health providers frequently with job change? It definitely, moving to Medicare for all definitely solves a lot of the problems that people don't like about healthcare. It makes it less complicated, for one. And, you know, as a consumer, that's half of it, right? People are like, I don't understand. What is this like network? Why is the provider in network but not before? Why is this service not covered? It was covered last year on a different plan, and now I have a different deductible and it's $1,200. I mean, I think even really informed people have trouble navigating the system. And that tells you that it's really complicated. I definitely, Medicare for All would make that less complicated. It's really just pushing against, the politics of it and the American preference in general for a private market, which actually leads into Will's question, which is which country do I think has the best healthcare system and what would be the most viable? So without opining about which one is the best, because I actually really don't know. I've been around enough economists to know that everything has a trade-off. So there is no best, right? You're just kind of picking what you think matters. I think that we are most like Germany, Japan, France, who run what's called a Bismarck model, which is a model around private health insurance. It's a model that uses private not-for-profit insurance rather than the UK's NHS, which is a public insurance, or Canada's NHI, Taiwan's NHI, right? A single government payer. So we're already closer to them because over half of Americans get their coverage through their employer, their family member's employer. But what makes them different than us is they highly regulate the private market. Almost Germany and Japan are all payer models, which means that it doesn't matter which payer, which insurer, they all pay the same amount. So Japan, the government regulates the prices of things. That's very different here than like Blue Cross negotiating with hospitals and United negotiating with hospitals. And, when we can get transparent data, we see that they're all paying different amounts and none of them have real bargaining power because they're small. But when you're big, you're like the whole country, you have a ton of bargaining power and you can really push prices down with that bargaining power, but you could keep the private system that way. So to me, that's the logical next step on cost control, is to figure out some level of regulation overlay to the private system that we're comfortable with to try to bring costs down. Does that answer the questions?
We do have a few more minutes. So if you want to, is there anything else that you feel like you haven't covered about your journey or research or work that you've done that you want to share? If not, we do have more time if anybody else wants to post some last minute questions.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to answer more questions while we wait for that. I'll just say that, I'm biased, right? Everybody, if you come to multiple of these talks, everyone's going to be like, my area is like the best and the most interesting. But in ways that's true, right? It's really all about kind of what you gravitate to. But I think that there's no better time than right now to be working in health policy. I actually see some former students who are working in health policy or working around health policy on this call. And they can attest to that, right? I bet their jobs are very demanding, but very interesting. And the work is meaningful. The work has consequences that impact our lives. And I think there's an appreciation for public health from most people. Not everyone, but, about the work. The work is not hidden anymore. The successes are not, they are visible. Before, when public health was successful, it just meant we just went about our daily lives and we didn't notice it. But right now, right, you can see the successes. So wherever you go in public health, I think there's no better time, and there's no time that we need more diverse perspectives than now.
Great question in the chat.
Yeah. What is one of my proudest accomplishments? That's a really tough one. I would say, well, the times I feel my work is most meaningful is when I see former students, because I feel like I might have played just a small part in the very cool and impactful work that they're doing. And that, I feel proud of that. And I feel proud of them. I think when people gravitate towards teaching, it's because they want to be part of other people's, their own journeys. And I think, nothing is more gratifying to me than to see my students' successes.
Well, I'm gonna put both of our email addresses in the chat.
Yes.
I encourage anybody to please reach out to either of us, especially if you are interested in talking to someone else at Tulane or knowing more, or you have a question and you don't know what to ask. Please just reach out to me, or Molly as well, and we'll put you in touch. I also put the link to all of our other events happening this week. Please feel free to register and check out on our website. Also on that same website, we have information about our open house coming up at the end of the month. If any prospective students are watching and you really want to learn more about the degree programs and areas of focus specifically at Tulane, please feel free to scroll down under the National Public Health Week events to register for our open house. But thank you so much to you for sharing a ton about yourself. I think you have so much knowledge about policy and some really cool experience. And it was really fun to watch you like light up and talk about something that you really enjoy working on.
Well, thanks to everybody for coming. I appreciate the really good questions. Never a dull moment around here. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions or want to follow up offline. I'm always happy to do that.
This session was also recorded, and so we will have it if you guys want to rewatch it later, or if you know someone that you may want to send it to, I'll have that link probably next week. So please feel free to reach out. We want to stay in touch with all of you, and thanks again, Molly, and everyone for watching. I hope you guys have a great rest of your Monday.
Bye, y'all.
Bye. Good to see you too, Cam.